Lesson 51, Ongoing Challenges. Let's take a look at some of the ongoing challenges in civil rights because we're not there yet, as we all know. Affirmative action. These are programs intended to make up for past discrimination. What do? They encourage the hiring and promoting of minorities and women and the admission of more minority students to colleges. Basically trying to bring in groups that have historically been excluded from the business world as well as the educational field. Critics complained that affirmative action programs gave preferential treatment to women and minorities, amounting to discrimination against men and whites. The man at the top of the mountain, the white man. Hey, no cheating. Abolish affirmative action now. Content of character, not color of skin. The famous Supreme Court case on affirmative action was the Regents of the University of California versus Bakke, 1978. Alan Bakke, a 35-year-old white man, applied to med school at the University of California at Davis in 1973, and then again in 1974, under the General Admissions Program. The med school had a special admissions program as well for special candidates who were, quote, economically and or educationally disadvantaged. They had 100 slots for all applicants. 84 were for general admissions. 16 were set aside for, quote, qualified minorities, end quote, as part of the school's affirmative action program. Bakke tried for admissions into Cal at Davis through the general admissions. In the 2 years that Bakke applied to med school, the 16 set-aside candidates were admitted who had significantly lower GPAs and test scores than Bakke. Bakke filed a suit in California court claiming that the special admissions program excluded him on the basis of race and was a violation of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. So this is a case in reverse discrimination. The California trial and appellate courts ruled in favor of Bakke. The California Regents, they're like the state Board of Education that we have. The Board of Governors, actually, it's called, in the that runs our university system. I want to say they oversee our 16 public universities in North Carolina. They're called the Board of Governors. Well, the California Regents, they run the higher educational system in California. So the Regents appealed the decision, and it was taken up by the Supreme Court. If Bakke wins, we all lose in employment, education, housing. Bakke thought he was more qualified than those other candidates based upon his test scores and his GPA. I'm going to skip this part of the PowerPoint to go to the result of the Bakke case. I'm going to talk about this in class. Who is actually more qualified based upon test scores? I want to get to that in class, but let's just see what the Supreme Court said about Bakke here. They ruled 5-favor in Bakke's favor. June 23, 1978, Lewis Powell delivered the majority opinion of the court. He found that quotas protected minority applicants from competition with the regular applicants, and were thus unconstitutional because they discriminated against non-minority applicants. But race could be a plus. It could only be one of numerous factors used by college admissions offices and hiring boards. It could be a plus, could not be the reason why someone's selected, but it could give an applicant an edge if all other factors were equal. With all else being equal, race could be a determining factor. So the court managed to minimize white opposition to the goal of equality by finding for Bakke, while extending gains for racial minorities through affirmative action. What happened to Bakke? After prevailing in the U.S. Supreme Court, UC Davis admitted him to med school. He graduated in 1982 from med school. He then practiced as an anesthesiologist in Minnesota. The Supreme's long-awaited ruling. Affirmative action is okay as long as it's not too affirmative or too active. Admissions. Daughter of alum. Son of big donor. Soccer player. Raised in distant state. Minority. Didn't get in. It's his fault. The struggle for equal rights continues today. Many Americans are subject to racial profiling, being singled out as suspects based on the basis of the way they look. Racial profiling starts early. White, brown, black. I'm going to skip this right here and skip another incident that occurred in New York City. We know lots of incidents have occurred recently, the last couple years, with police and African Americans. Some become victims of hate crimes. A hate crime is also known as a bias crime. It's a criminal offense committed against a person, property, or society that is motivated in whole or in part by the offender's bias against a race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, or ethnicity or national origin. Matthew Wayne Shepard, 1998. October 12th, he died. He was a Wyoming student. He was tortured and murdered near Laramie, Wyoming, October of 1998. Shortly after midnight, Shepard met a couple men for the first time at this lounge in Laramie, Wyoming. It was decided that McKinney and Henderson, these two men, would give Shepard a ride home. McKinney and Henderson subsequently drove the car to a remote, rural area, proceeded to rob, pistol whip, and torture Shepard, leaving him to die tied to a fence. Still on the fence, Shepard, who was still alive but in a coma, was discovered 18 hours later. A cyclist initially who initially mistook Shepard for Scarecrow, Aaron Kreifels, cyclist. Shepard had suffered fractures to the back of his head, in front of his right ear, brain damage, affected his ability to regulate the heart, body temperature, other vital functions, cuts around his head, neck, and face. He never gained consciousness and remained on full life support. Candlelight vigils were held by the people of Laramie. He was only 21 years of age when he was pronounced dead, October 12, 1998. Shepard was gay. Fred Phelps, leader of the Westbrook Baptist Church in Topeka, Kansas, took his church's "God Hates Fags" message to the funeral of Matthew Shepard, held in Casper, Wyoming on Saturday, October 17th. 5 days later, two of his picket signs read, "No tears for queers, fag Matt in hell." After a decade of debate, the Matthew Shepard Act passed both houses of Congress, and President Obama signed the measure into law on October 28, 2009. Women's suffrage. Although the Constitution did not guarantee women the right to vote, it did not explicitly deny them suffrage. States made their own laws in that regard. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton insisted early on that women belonged at the polls. Wyoming became the first state to permit women the right to vote in state elections, 1869. And then the 19th Amendment, 1920, permitted women to vote in all national and state elections. And that concludes Lesson 51, Ongoing Challenges. And there's a lot of ongoing challenges today in terms of race. Charlottesville, Virginia, we know what happened there. Race relations are pretty tense period currently. It's lots of challenges ahead.